Most people believe inflation only makes things more expensive. That's not the biggest problem. Open your banking app right now. Look at your balance. Does it look almost the same as it did a year ago? Maybe even a little higher? Good. Now tell me this. Why does everything feel harder? Why does the same grocery run cost more? Why does the same life somehow demand more money every single month? Your balance didn't change much, but something did. And here's what most people never stop to ask. What if the problem isn't your account? What if the problem is what your money can actually do? Inflation doesn't work the way most people think. It doesn't arrive with a warning. It doesn't knock on your door. It doesn't ask for permission. And by the time most people realize what's happening, the damage has already been done. This video is not about economics. It's not about interest rates or government policy. It's about something much closer to home. It's about what is quietly happening to every dollar you already own. Right now, as you watch this, stay with me until the end. Because what you're about to understand will change the way you see your money forever. To understand what inflation is really doing to you, you have to go back to something most people were never taught. Not in school, not at home, not anywhere. And it starts with a simple question. What is money? Not what it buys, not what it represents. What actually is it? Most people would say, it's what you earn, what you save, what you spend. But here's the thing. Money, in itself, is just paper, or a number on a screen. It has no value of its own. Its value comes entirely from one thing, what people believe it's worth. And that belief can change. In fact, it changes every single day. This is where the story of inflation really begins. Not in a government building, not in a central bank, but in the very nature of what money is. You see, for most of human history, money was tied to something real. Gold, silver, something physical, something scarce, something that couldn't simply be created out of thin air. And that mattered. Because when money is tied to something real, there's a natural limit to how much of it can exist. But then, something changed. Governments began to realize something powerful. If you control the money supply, you control the economy. You can print more money when times are tough, stimulate spending, fund wars, pay debts, and for a while, it seemed to work. But every time more money enters the system, without a corresponding increase in real goods and services, something inevitable happens. Each individual dollar becomes worth a little less, not dramatically, not overnight, but consistently, quietly, year after year, like a slow leak in a tire. You don't notice it at first. You just know that one day, the ride feels different, and by then, you've already lost ground. This is the origin of inflation, not an accident, not a mystery, but a predictable consequence of how modern money works. And understanding this is the first step toward not being its victim. Now that you understand where inflation comes from, let me show you how it became the invisible force it is today. Because the story didn't end with governments printing money, it evolved. And the way it evolved is something most people never heard about. In 1971, something happened that changed the financial world forever. The United States made a decision that affected every person on the planet, whether they knew it or not. They disconnected the dollar from gold completely. Up until that point, every dollar in circulation was backed by a real amount of gold sitting in a vault somewhere. There was a limit, a ceiling, a physical constraint on how much money could exist. But after 1971, that ceiling disappeared. Money was no longer tied to anything real. It became what economists call a fiat currency, which is just a fancy way of saying it's worth something because the government says it is, and because people believe it. Now think about what that means. when there's no physical limit to how much money can be created. The temptation to create more is always there. And governments and central banks throughout history have consistently given in to that temptation. During the 2008 financial crisis, trillions were injected into the economy. During the pandemic, even more. Hundreds of billions, then trillions, created and distributed in months to prevent collapse, to keep things moving, to survive. And in the short term, it worked. The economy didn't collapse. People kept spending, businesses stayed open, jobs were saved. But there was a cost that didn't show up immediately. A cost that arrived slowly, gradually, in the form of prices. Rising quietly at first, then faster still, until one day, you went to the supermarket, and the same basket of food that cost you $150 2 years ago now costs $210, and you thought, everything is getting more expensive. But that's not quite right. Everything didn't get more expensive. Your money got less powerful. There's a difference, and it's an important one. Because if you think prices are rising, you focus on spending less. But if you understand that your money is losing power, you start asking a completely different question. How do I make sure my money doesn't lose its value? And that question is the beginning of a very different financial life. Here's where most people go wrong. And I mean most people, not just the ones who don't think about money, but the ones who do, the ones who are careful, who save diligently, who pride themselves on being responsible with their finances. They make the same mistake. And it's not the mistake you'd expect. It's not overspending, not reckless investing, not ignoring their finances. It's something much quieter than that. It's leaving their money in a savings account and calling it safe. Now, before you disagree with me, hear me out. Because this is the part that most financial conversations skip over. Saving money is not the same as protecting money. Those are two completely different things. When you put money in a savings account, you feel responsible, disciplined, in control, and you are. But here's what the bank doesn't put on the statement. While your money sits there, inflation is working against it every single day. Let's make this concrete. Imagine you saved $10,000 last year. You put it in a savings account earning maybe 1% or 2% interest. You feel good. The number went up a little. But inflation that same year was running at 4% or 5%, which means in real terms, in purchasing power terms, your $10,000 actually lost value, not on paper. The number still says $10,000, but what that $10,000 can buy is less than it was a year ago. You saved perfectly and still fell behind. And this is the cruel irony of inflation. It punishes the most responsible behavior. The people who spend everything, who live paycheck to paycheck, they don't feel it the same way because they don't have savings to erode. But the person who worked hard, spent carefully, saved consistently, they're the ones watching their purchasing power quietly disappear year after year without a single dollar leaving their account. And the worst part? Most people don't even know it's happening. They look at their balance, see the number, feel reassured, and go back to their lives, not realizing that the number on the screen is only half the story. The other half, the part that matters, is what that number can actually do in the real world. And that changes everything. And here's something even more unsettling. Most people know this on some level. They've heard the word inflation, they've felt the pinch at the supermarket, but there's a gap between knowing something intellectually and truly understanding what it means for your life. That gap is where most people live. They know prices are rising. They know their savings aren't growing much, but they haven't connected those two facts into a single clear picture. The picture that shows that every month they leave their money sitting still is a month they fall further behind, not dramatically, not catastrophically, Just quietly, consistently, inevitably, like sand slipping through fingers. You don't notice each grain. But one day you look down, and the pile is smaller than you remember. And the most painful part? There's no one to blame. No theft occurred, no fraud was committed, no mistake was made. Just time and inflation doing what they always do to money that isn't working. Here's the part that nobody talks about at dinner tables, or in school hallways, or in most financial advice columns. The people who build and maintain real wealth don't think about money the way most people do, and nowhere is that difference more visible than in how they respond to inflation. While most people are worried about prices rising, the wealthy are asking a completely different question, not how do I spend less, but how do I make sure my assets grow faster than inflation? See, there's a fundamental shift in thinking that happens. At a certain point in someone's financial journey, they stop seeing money as something to accumulate and protect and start seeing it as something to deploy, to put to work, to make sure it's always moving, always growing, always outpacing the silent erosion of inflation. Let me show you what this looks like in practice. When inflation rises, property values tend to rise with it. Because the cost of building new properties goes up, the cost of land goes up, the cost of everything goes up. Which means someone who owns real estate is sitting on an asset that naturally keeps pace with or exceeds inflation, while their mortgage, if they have one, is being paid back in dollars that are worth less every year. In other words, inflation is actually working for them, not against them. Think about that for a moment. The same force that is silently stealing from the person with savings in a bank account is quietly building wealth for the person who owns assets. This isn't luck. This isn't privilege. It's understanding. It's knowing how the system works and positioning yourself accordingly. Stocks work similarly. When companies raise their prices because of inflation, their revenues go up, their profits go up, their stock values tend to go up, which means the person who owns shares in those companies is participating in that growth, while the person who owns only cash is watching their position weaken. And then there are real assets, commodities, businesses, intellectual property, things that produce value, things that grow, things that don't sit still while inflation does its quiet work. The wealthy don't have a secret formula. They don't have access to investments that you don't. What they have is a different relationship with money itself. They understand that in an inflationary world, holding cash is not safe. It's a slow surrender. And the moment you understand that, the moment that truth lands, everything about how you think about your financial life begins to shift. Let me make this real for you, because concepts are useful, but numbers, real numbers, from real life, hit differently. Let's start with something simple. A loaf of bread. In 1970, a loaf of bread in the United States cost around 25 cents. Today, that same loaf costs anywhere between $3 and $5. That's not because bread changed. The wheat is the same, the flour is the same, the recipe is the same. What changed is the value of the dollar. Over 50 years, the dollar lost more than 90% of its purchasing power, which means a dollar from 1970 is worth less than 10 cents today. Let that sit for a moment. Now let's bring it closer to home. Think about someone who retired in 2000. They had $500,000 saved, a substantial amount, a lifetime of work and discipline. They put it in a conservative savings account, earning modest interest, felt secure, felt prepared. But over the next 20 years, inflation quietly did its work. By 2020, that $500,000 in purchasing power terms was worth closer to $300,000 in real terms. They didn't spend it. They didn't lose it in the market. They just held it carefully, responsibly, and inflation took the rest. Now compare that to someone who took a different approach. Same $500,000 in 2000, but instead of leaving it in cash, they put it into a diversified mix of assets, real estate, stocks, things that produce value and grow over time. By 2020, that same $500,000 had grown to well over $1,500,000. Same starting point, same time period, completely different outcome. Not because one person was smarter, not because one person took reckless risks, but because one person understood what inflation does to money that sits still and the other didn't. Here's another example that hits closer to everyday life. Think about your salary. If you earned $60,000 in 2015 and you're still earning $60,000 today, you haven't stayed the same, you've fallen behind, because what $60,000 could buy in 2015 requires closer to $80,000 today. You didn't get a pay cut, but inflation gave you one anyway. Quietly, without anyone announcing it, without anything changing on your payslip. This is what inflation does in the real world. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't send a letter. It just shows up one day in your grocery bill, in your rent, in the quiet feeling that life keeps getting more expensive, while your money stays exactly where you left it. And once you see it this way, you can't unsee it. Let me give you one more example, because this one hits closest to home. Think about a couple who bought a house in 1990 for $150,000. At the time, it felt like a stretch, a significant commitment, a real financial risk. But they did it, and over the following decades, as inflation quietly pushed prices higher, that same house became worth $400,000, then $600,000, then more. Not because the house changed, not because the neighborhood dramatically improved overnight, but because the dollars used to measure its value became worth less over time. More dollars were needed to represent the same thing, and the couple who owned it, without doing anything extraordinary, without making a brilliant investment decision, simply by owning something real, something physical, something that inflation pushes up rather than erodes, built significant wealth, while their neighbor, who kept the same amount in a savings account, watched that money quietly lose its power. Same starting point, same neighborhood, same time period, completely different outcome. Not because of intelligence, not because of risk, but because of what they chose to own. So what do you actually do with all of this? Because understanding a problem is only useful if it changes something. And I want to be very clear about something before we go any further. This is not financial advice. What I'm about to share are not instructions, not recommendations, not a prescription for your specific situation. They are perspectives. Ways of thinking that the people who navigate inflation successfully tend to share. What you do with them is entirely your decision. With that said, let's talk about what actually works. The first shift is the most important one, and it has nothing to do with a specific investment. It's a change in how you think about money itself. The question is no longer, how much do I have? The question becomes, what is my money doing? Is it sitting still, slowly losing ground? Or is it moving, growing, working? That shift in question changes everything that follows. The second thing that people who protect themselves from inflation understand is the difference between assets and cash. Cash has a role, absolutely. You need liquidity, you need an emergency fund, you need money that's accessible. But beyond that buffer, every dollar sitting idle is a dollar quietly losing ground. Assets, on the other hand, tend to move with inflation or ahead of it. Real estate, equities, businesses, commodities, things that produce value, things that grow, things that don't sit still. These are the instruments that historically, over time, have protected purchasing power. Not perfectly, not without risk, not without volatility, but consistently, Over the long term, they have done what cash cannot. The third thing, and this one is perhaps the most overlooked, is the value of financial education itself. Not a course, not a certification, but the ongoing, deliberate, honest effort to understand how money works, how inflation works, how markets work, how the system works. Because the people who are most vulnerable to inflation are not the ones with the least money. They're the ones with the least understanding, and that, unlike money, is something entirely within your control. You can start today with nothing more than curiosity and the willingness to ask better questions. Not, why is everything so expensive, but what is my money actually doing right now? And is that enough? And if you've made it this far, I want to say something directly to you because it matters that you're still here. It tells me you're not just looking for entertainment. You're looking for understanding, and that's exactly what this channel is built for. So if this conversation has been valuable, I'd like to invite you to subscribe. Not because of an algorithm, not because of a number, but because every week we sit down and have exactly this kind of honest conversation about money, about wealth, about the things that quietly shape your financial life. Hit subscribe and stay in this conversation with us. There's one more thing worth saying here, and it's something that most financial conversations avoid because it's uncomfortable. The system is not designed to tell you this. Banks profit when you leave your money sitting in low-interest accounts. Governments benefit when people don't fully understand inflation. The entire consumer economy is built on the assumption that you will keep spending, keep borrowing, keep accumulating things that lose value, rather than assets that gain it. This isn't a conspiracy, it's just how incentives work. And understanding whose incentives are served by your financial behavior is one of the most powerful forms of financial education there is, because the moment you see it clearly, you start making decisions that serve your interests, not theirs. And that shift, small as it sounds, is the beginning of a completely different financial life. There's a moment that happens. For most people, it comes quietly, not in a crisis, not in a dramatic revelation, but in an ordinary moment. Maybe you're standing in a supermarket, looking at a price tag, and something doesn't add up. You know you've been careful, you know you've been responsible, you know the money is there, and yet something feels off. That feeling, that quiet unease. Is inflation speaking to you? Not in headlines, not in economic reports, but in the language of everyday life, the language of prices and bills, and the subtle, persistent feeling that the same effort produces less and less. Most people dismiss that feeling. They blame the government, blame the economy, blame bad luck, and then they go home and leave their money exactly where it was, waiting for something to change. But here's what I want you to take from this conversation. Nothing changes on its own. Inflation doesn't stop because you ignore it. It doesn't reverse because you feel frustrated. It continues, quietly, consistently, indifferently. Whether you understand it or not, whether you act on it or not, the only thing that changes is whether you're on the right side of it or the wrong one. And the difference between those two positions is not intelligence, not luck, not privilege. It's understanding, real, honest, hard-won understanding of how money works and what it does and what happens to it when it sits still. The person who understands this doesn't panic, doesn't make reckless decisions, doesn't chase get-rich-quick schemes. They simply start asking better questions. They start looking at their financial life differently. They start making small, deliberate, consistent choices that over time compound into something significant. Not because they had more to start with, but because they understood something that most people don't. That in a world where money quietly loses value every single day, Standing still is not safe. It never was. And now, neither are you standing still. Because you watched this video, you asked the question, you stayed until the end, and that changes something. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but the seed is planted, and seeds, given the right conditions, always grow. And here's what most people never realize about that seed. It doesn't need perfect conditions to start growing. It doesn't need a certain amount of money, a certain level of income, a certain moment in the market. It needs one thing, a decision. The decision to stop waiting for the right time and to start making the time right, because the right time, as most people eventually discover, was always now. It was always this moment, this conversation, this realization, this quiet shift in how you see the world around you. The person who acts on that shift today, even in the smallest possible way, is already ahead of the version of themselves from yesterday. And tomorrow, they will be ahead of today. That is how wealth is built. Not in dramatic moments, not in lucky breaks, not in perfect timing, but in the quiet accumulation of better decisions made consistently over time by someone who finally understands what they're up against and chooses to respond with clarity instead of fear. This video is for educational purposes only. Nothing you heard here is financial advice. Every financial decision is yours to make, based on your own research, your own situation, your own judgment. That's not a disclaimer, that's a reminder of your own power. If this conversation meant something to you, share it with 5 people who need to hear it. Not because it's a video, but because understanding money is one of the greatest gifts you can give someone. Subscribe to the channel, because this conversation continues every week, and leave a comment below. Tell me honestly, did you know inflation was doing this to your money? Or is this the first time you're seeing it clearly? Because this channel exists for exactly that moment, the moment everything starts to make sense, and the next video is already waiting. And while you wait, let me leave you with one last thought. Every single day that passes is a day your money is either working for you or working against you. There is no neutral ground. There is no standing still. The person who understands this and acts on it, even in small ways, even imperfectly, is already ahead of the vast majority of people, not because they have more money, not because they had a better start, but because they chose to understand. And understanding, once it arrives, cannot be taken away. Not by inflation, not by markets, not by anything. It stays with you, and it compounds, just like the very forces we've been talking about, only this time, working in your favor. That's the gift of financial education. Not a shortcut, not a formula, not a guarantee, just clarity. And clarity, in a world full of noise, is worth more than almost anything else. And that is what we are building here, together. One conversation at a time, one video at a time, one honest question at a time. Because the world doesn't lack information. It lacks clarity. It lacks the kind of conversation that cuts through the noise and speaks directly to what matters: your money, your future, your life. That is what this channel is for. Not to tell you what to do, but to help you see clearly, so that when you decide with understanding. Not with fear, not with confusion, not with the desperate hope that someone else has the answer, but with the quiet confidence of someone who finally understands what is actually happening and what they can do about it. That confidence is worth more than any investment tip, more than any market prediction, more than any financial formula, because it stays with you. Through every market cycle, through every economic shift, through every headline that tries to frighten you into a bad decision, it stays. and it grows. Just like your understanding, just like your wealth, when you finally decide to stop standing still, and the next video is already waiting, and so are you. The only question now is what you will do with what you know, because knowing and doing are two very different things, and the distance between them is where most people stay forever. Don't be most people. You already know too much to stand still any longer. The world is moving, money is moving, time is moving. The only question is, are you moving with it? Start today. Start now. Start here with what you have, with what you know, with who you are, right now. This is your moment, and it always will be.